All right, so welcome to the Chaos Cast. We are glad to have you. This is a podcast exclusive. I got my friend Jeremy Calgaro on with us. He is now. I believe, did I hear this right, Jeremy? You're a former Army SERE trainer.
I was a SERE instructor. I taught survival with the Marine Corps in Bridgeport, and I also taught with the National Guard and a little bit with the active Army. I've taught survival classes, private survival classes, and I've deployed 5 times. I've been to a lot of different places, and pretty much this has been my obsession for years and years and years.
So Jeremy's one of my go-to guys. I have a group of guys on, really across social media that I go to that, if I've got something I don't know, one of these guys will know. And so Jeremy's right up in there. This is your life. You've got the farm, you've got the whole 9 yards. You are, I remember one time you told Ryan in one of our live stream discussions, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm level 1 because we were trying to do levels of preparedness, and you were like, I'm an A. And he wasn't buying it, but I mean, from what you told me, I really believe it.
I could honestly say, even if I didn't have my farm, I'd be fine. Going out in the woods is not a big thing.
That's the goal, self-sufficiency. Having that knowledge.
Oh yeah,
all right.
That's true self-sufficiency.
Oh yeah. A lot of people don't realize what it takes for the knowledge it takes for self-sufficiency. Everybody's putting up food, they're putting up, water, they're putting up tools and ammo. I mean, if you don't got the right knowledge, it ain't gonna matter if you have those things. You can lose it all in a fire. I think that English prepper. Mm-hmm. Now he lost everything in a fire over in South Africa, and if we think it's bad here, South Africa is rough. I mean, they have riots every day, food theft, farms being raided. But you were talking before we got started. You had just like from what I was reading, it was just kind of how we got to where we are and how we can kind of get out of where we are, because they boxed us in a hole. We're completely dependent upon the government in a lot of cases. But when you look at it, most people don't realize how screwed they are. And
a lot of people aren't.
We had a major disaster.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't willing to be dependent or independent because they like it cushy. They like it nice. They like it soft. They like things easy. They don't want to have to stress about it. That's where they start getting that whole ostrich head in the sand, because
the ostriches.
Yeah, and they would rather ignore something altogether than understand that they're going to be miserable at some point. Doesn't matter how self-sufficient you are, you're not going to be as comfortable with your life as you are right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've got that's why people come together in societies. It's easier to survive in groups, and ease of survival is what humans look for. I mean, it's what made us the top of the scale, the food chain. That's that we have that little bit of something different than the rest of creation, and that's what we look for. And the easier it gets, the lazier we get. So we get used to it real quick, it seems like.
And it's one of those things that we get complacent with it as well. We take it for granted.
And one of the things that we kind of look at, what made this Western world so easy, and a lot of it had to do with America. It started in Europe, but a lot of it had to do with America because you had a lot of people just scrabbling to survive. So literally everything they could come up with, they did. But we were really good at producing food. We had some really fertile land. And I think that's the key thing, is having having enough food to be able to sit down and think. You're not just continuously thinking about survival. And so there's a lot of inventions that have kind of led us to the point we're at. And that was something, you were wanting to touch on. How would you like to what would you like to start on that point? Where would you like to take our focus on that point?
So everything about humanity is and everything about life is about continuing life. And one of the biggest things that humanity has been good at is creating inventions and coming up with new ways to make things easier to keep life going and to create new life. Whether it be with farming or industry. And every time that we hit one of those milestones, like the wheel was a huge one. All of a sudden we can start transporting our goods and our food and stuff with us long term. Bread was a huge one. We took grain and we learned how to grind it up, add some water, and then all of a sudden we have a calorie dense food that can last, that can get cooked with grain that we can keep in a clay pot or in a basket for months.
That bread's what's getting me right now. I think I'm really surviving right now.
Yeah.
That's the thing we're trying to cut out of our diet, but I think if it went down, we're going to be begging for it back.
But also, too, we'll be working so hard that, see, that's the one thing that has been tough for humanity now, is that we're not working as hard as we used to, so we don't need the calories that we used to need. And that 3,000 a day calorie index that they came up with, that has everything to do with somebody who's working hard all day. Somebody who's working hard all day, if they're eating 3,000 calories, for the most part, will be okay. That's why MREs are a full day. One MRE is a full day's ration of food. But you have guys that are eating
that's why your hikers
MREs.
That's why your hikers and your outdoorsmen carry such calorie dense food. You've got to burn. I'm going to be going on a big hike here pretty soon, so I've been kind of getting in my mind what I want to take, because I know I'm going to be getting hungry. I'm going to need something quick to eat while we're walking, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to want a good meal. So I've got the ReadyWise adventure packs in there. So they sent me a crap load of them, so I'm going to be checking them out. By the way, shameless spill, Chaos 10 is the code. Go through our link and it'll be in the description. Go get you 10% off. But
I don't lie. I use them when I go hiking and stuff like that every once in a while. And what I'll do is I'll make jerky with like a stew seasoning or what have you, and I'll toss that in with the water while it's cooking with the meal. Oh yeah, we're talking dead on.
That's like a bouillon cube, or
you actually have some meat and some protein.
Have you seen the bacon in a can? I know we're going off on a tangent.
I've eaten it.
Is it good?
It's not bad. All right, so I don't know if you guys have Save a Lot down where you're at, but we have Save a Lot up here, and they have a shelf-stable bacon pack, and it's the same thing.
You talking about like the Oscar Mayer microwavable bacon type stuff that's already fully cooked and everything?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Okay, then yeah. I've thought about stocking up on that. How long do you think that would last on a shelf?
Honestly, that'll last 2-3 years without a problem. As long as you're.
So what about the can?
The can will be fine. It's a sealed can. It's sitting in its own oils. It's just like canning bacon. I've done that. It'll last fine as long as you don't have it sitting where it's warm all the time. If you have a cool room,
it's got to be.
Yeah.
That's my main concern. If civilization has completely fallen when you don't have access to good quality bacon, and that is my thing. I want to have bacon. I'm going to talk to ReadyWise about they need a number 10 can of bacon in their system, because that's the one thing I've not seen yet. I mean, maybe some bacon bits, but
also too. All right, so the thing with bacon and all that is that fats don't freeze dry well. They really, yeah, and that's one of the things that that's part of the whole discussion is that's why we had refrigeration. That's why refrigeration kicked our life expectancy up so well, was because we were able to keep meats for a long time, for where we can keep those fats for a while, to where we can go back and we can cook something that we killed months ago, rather than having to jerk everything and store everything dry. Because when you store dry, it doesn't have fat.
I was watching, basically it was History Channel, Made in America type deal, showing how everything became the way it was. And they were talking about bird's eye and how they learned how to, flash freeze the food. Yep. And that was, I remember a lot of different things I've read in the Reminisce magazines about frozen vegetables kind of changing the game, causing refrigerators and freezers to become more commonplace, especially in the supermarkets and the delis. And now it's amazing. It's an everyday thing now. They used to have ice boxes where you buy your ice, and now we have refrigerators.
There you had people on farms used to have ice houses where you would gather up your ice. You would freeze ice throughout the winter and pack it into this ice house. And you would pull it out little bit by little bit to have the ice, or you would put your meat stores. You would put all your stuff that you needed to store in that ice house. And a lot of times you'd have that ice house would be buried into a hill, and then right next to that would be your root cellar, because then the root cellar would be able to stay cool as well, or a couple more degrees cooler than it already was. And
be like a refrigerator.
Yeah, and with just the transfer of temperature. And so it was one of those things that with refrigeration and with freezing, especially with bird's eye with their flash freezing and stuff like that, our population jumped, our life expectancy as a whole jumped. And it was because all of a sudden we were able to get these fruits and vegetables that we were, if we canned them, that was great. But that canning's only been around since World War One, not World War One, since the Civil War. It was the Napoleonic Wars. The canning itself, the modern process of canning, started with a competition that Napoleon did because he wanted to be able to have some way to get food out to his troops without it rotting. And so it started off with a wax top. And it was a glass jar with a glass lid with a wax top. And
they would use beeswax. Beeswax is what they used to seal off a lot of black powder rifles and stuff back in the day to kind of waterproof it, wasn't it?
Beeswax is also what they used. They did that, and they also used beeswax to seal the jars that were holding all the seeds that we find in like Egypt and the Middle East, where we're finding these jars full of seed, and then hundreds and hundreds of years later, we're sprouting those plants. And it's because,
that's wild. I was listening to this guy talk, and he lives up in Alaska. They had him on Joe Rogan's show, and he was talking about finding all these saber-toothed tiger heads and mastodon bones, but the seeds were coming unfrozen out of the permafrost and were sprouting up. And he said, it's like nothing that grows around here. It's wild how seeds can do, just do what they do. It's that little miracle, I guess you'd say, that God created for us.
And it is. And still with that freezing, we have our freezers and all that. The world's doomsday seed stocks that we have, the seed banks that we have, are in giant industrial freezers in the middle of really cold areas, so that the freezers don't have to work as hard. Like up in Iceland and what was it, Iceland or Greenland?
And they have that doomsday seed seed storage. That's kind of, it seems to me, where they started getting more control with the government. With the Dust Bowl, we went into more hybridized seed. Now it saved our butts, but now you actually have people like Monsanto that have been allowed to have patents on their hybridized seed. We had a gentleman here local that kept his seed and replanted, and they came in and ended up, suing him because he went and sold. Mm-hmm. It's something he normally did. And they sued him because they own the patent on that seed that he kept, and it ruined him. His wife left him. I think he ended up committing suicide because of what it did to his life. But yeah, it's amazing. We went from, every family had their seed, and then we went, well, you've got to wait for somebody to send you seed to be able to plant.
Oh yeah. And currently, all right, so you hear stories every now and then of these heirloom seed savers, the seed banks and stuff, not Baker Creek, but like there was a story I read not too long ago about an older man who went through and he saved apple seeds. And he saved apple seeds for like 70 years, where he had something like a few thousand different heirloom type apples that seed for those apples that he can grow, along with all sorts of other types of heirloom seeds. And groups like Monsanto and stuff like that are trying to shut those guys down, number one, so that they can get access to those heirloom seeds so that they can kind of screw around with them and see what they can come up with. But also, too, because as long as those people are having their own seed and producing their own seed, they can kind of, so let's say you need a seed that does this. Well, chances are that guy has a seed that can do that. You don't have to have Monsanto go and create it. You just have to go through and see what his notes are. Oh, I have this seed here that was planted in this state at this time that had these characteristics. And so stuff like that actually scares bigger companies like that. It's kind of a great thing. It's like a David and Goliath, only instead of David having a sling, David has a freaking cannon.
So my son, he's actually messaging me about our heirloom seeds. That's something we got into this year. I'm on eBay trying to buy, been buying them the last few years. I've got some sorghum and things, and he's sprouting, and he just sent me a message. He said, "Hey, I just thought about it. I put that seed in upside down, and I just wanted to let you know." I'm like, "You done planted it. Ain't nothing I can do." It sprouted.
As long as the ground's loose enough, it should be fine.
Yeah. Well, what we've done, we're putting them in those the dollar store. They have those biodegradable seed pods now that look like an ice tray, and I have some left from last year, and we're going to sprout. We've sprouted them in napkins, which they got going real good in the napkin. I let them keep going, so now all I had to do was tear the napkins and then just put them in the soil because they started taking root in that wet napkin.
Yeah. Yeah, I started, even though I'm not big on big seed companies, I started getting the Burpee reusable trays with the silicone bottoms. And I started doing that because I figure eventually the silicone's going to go bad and that'll come out of there. But then I'll be able to use those as seed blocks and just pretty much just shape the dirt as blocks.
Well, so would it shock the roots taking them out of those reusable silicone things?
Not if you get them out early enough. That's the big thing, is that you have a lot of people leave their plants in so long that the roots are hitting those walls and starting to circle around. Like if you pull a seedling out of one of those and there are so many roots that you can't see any dirt anymore, you've left it in there too long. It should be a good mix of roots and dirt and soil that you're seeing when you pull those out, so that it won't shock them. Also, too, if you go through and they're already wrapping around that seed pod, they're already wrapped around that dirt pod, then at that point, when they go grow out, it's going to take them longer to grow out because they have to get out of the habit of growing in a circle or a square.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, do you think that the biodegradable seed pods, do you think those would help or hinder in that process because you're planting them into the ground?
I can honestly say I've never had those work.
You haven't? Oh, okay.
No.
I've had good success with seedlings out of them. But.
Well, your soil's probably a bit different than mine too. We have clay, so if you put that seed pod in there, that it doesn't break down. You have to grow the like in my raised beds, I could probably use them, but anything in the ground, I can't. And I do a lot of plants in the ground. Actually, my soil is now starting to change over where my beds and stuff are because I've grown so many plants and tilled them under that it's now starting to do the change over to actual topsoil for decent depth.
Yeah. Well, see, that's we have red clay mud when you dig down deep enough, but this property I have, it was my great grandfather's. Well, my uncle, he might have been he was my great uncle because it was my dad's uncle. But he went around for 4-H planting pine trees, which to me, a lot of times is one of the worst things to plant over top of where it used to be hardwood trees. But the amount of carbon and breakdown that got in the soil, and we have this rich black dirt. And then they had they had an outhouse over there, so that's over there too. There's worms all in it. So when I till it, there's worms, and you get a little bit of the field dirt, like the mix of the chert. But something else I'm fixing to do is I'm going to take dirt out of the woods because we have these just great black dirt up in the woods. I'm going to take that and mix it with my rabbit castings, my rabbit poop. And, man, that stuff, I started digging in that the other day for a post. Man, every scoop there was worms. And I'm like, yeah, we got something good.
There's a trick with that rabbit poop, and I know you probably have chickens too. Take both of those, get a 55-gallon drum or like a 30-gallon drum or something like that, one of the plastic ones. Put about a 5-gallon bucket of poop from the rabbits and the chickens in there and fill it full of water. And then let that sit and stagnate. You put a lid on it and all that. Let it sit and stagnate, and you keep it in the shade. It'll warm itself up. And then in about a week, you take that water and you spread that over where you're going to plant. You spread that about a week ahead of time. What that's going to do is it's going to add all those microbes into the soil. After you've tilled your ground or after you've set your ground, then put the water on it, let it sit for like a day or two, and then plant everything. And what that's going to do is that's going to introduce microbes that you're killing off with the tilling and prepping. And it's going to introduce microbes back into the ground so that when you put those plants in there, they'll feed off each other and make those plants grow faster.
The one good thing I've seen with a lot of your container gardening is once you let it set, you don't have to do a ton of tilling. You just got to keep the rain from impacting it and things. And so that's going to be the goal this year. I've got everything squared away. I got a top on my chicken pen now. I was letting them things just run wild. Then the hawk came, and that was my bad. I would have knew better. But now I've got the rabbit cage squared away. And this possibly this weekend or the next, I'm going to get my raised bed going. I've got all my seeds sprouting, and then in my normal gardening area, I've got my strawberry patch. I'm going to do my potatoes, and then I'm going to do corn down at the bottom in about 8 rows. I don't plant a ton of corn, but my wife's wanting that, and I'm going to plant some beans around the side to kind of nitrogenate that soil a little more. I'm going to definitely be tilling in like you're talking about with the rabbit and chicken poop. I've done that pretty regular. Pig, we tilled in after I got rid of the pigs. I still got tons of that left in there, and for the last few years, so I figured still got everything it needs in it. But we're going to dump that in there too. And man, I had a squash come up out of that poop pile at the pig. I didn't plant it. It had to have been something we fed them.
So every time that we went overseas, and you'd have the cesspools where all the sewage and stuff would go to sit before they handle it, and they clear it out and make it safe to dump into the ground. So these big cesspools, you know that besides the smell, you knew that you're around the cesspools because corn and tomatoes would pop up all around them.
Yeah, my uncle has talked about in his trailer park, they had the septic tank was kind of overflowing in a certain area, and he's got his own lot that he owns now, but his stuff would still be running in that septic tank. He said he'd have to go over and check everything every once in a while, but you'd see that little bit of overflow, and they would always be he said they were the prettiest tomatoes. He said, I thought about getting one, but then I thought about them growing up out of that septic tank. I just didn't think they'd be any good. I said, they're probably better than anything you can get at the store.
As long as there's not a lot of chemicals in it, as long as you're not adding a lot of chemicals to it, I guarantee you those were the best tomatoes you'll ever have. And I had people that used to look at me funny because I'd be out there. There'd be no chemicals in those pools because the military is really big about not dumping chemicals into their wastewater that's going to get dumped in the ground because they're in enough trouble about polluting the ground. So
Camp Lejeune over.
Yeah. And Camp Lejeune, friggin' Hawaii, friggin' there's a laundry list. And but yeah, no, they were great tomatoes. Everyone's just looking at me funny, but I'm like, best tomatoes you'll ever eat. And not only that, they were huge and they were like the perfect color. And the plants were growing out where you'd have a plant growing without a support system going straight up in the air, 5-6 feet up in the air, full of tomatoes.
Dang. That's a strong tomato right there.
Yeah. I wish I would have kept some seeds.
Now, maybe it's good or bad, but I was digging. I had to dig up a line that went to my septic tank from the house to replace it. It was an old metal shell type, and I was replacing it with a cleanout valve. When I was digging around, there was obvious seepage because it had rusted through and everything. Worms, some of the fattest worms you would ever think of around. I'm like, man, there's something to this recycled human waste growing here. I said, these worms is loving it over here.
Well, and what it is that, so if you notice when you're digging that up, the roots were a little difficult to get through. It's because the plants were growing extremely well. And the worms eat those roots. They eat what the plants freaking break up. And so those plants have broken up a lot and the roots are there. So there's plenty of cellulose for them to eat. And so they're going to town. They're going to go to town. And,
That's a good fishing bait right there.
Oh, yeah.
So I know I took us off the inventions kind of a little bit, but we got to talking about refrigeration. What else would you say would point, kind of gave us that, we were great at growing food. Obviously, we're talking about everything that the old timers did and the things we do now. So you go past the food preservation, what would you say, besides the refrigeration, what other inventions would you say were key to extending our survival and extending our life expectancies?
First off was the plow. Plow was a huge thing. And the population of the world bolted after the plow was introduced to the populace. And the first plows were just pieces of wood that were being dragged through the ground with just a stick. And to where they tied it off to an animal or they had somebody pulling it and the person was pushing down in the stick and cutting a row. Once they realized that they can cut rows and organize what they were planting, we moved from being a hunter-gatherer to an actual agrarian culture. When we started gathering actual herd animals, goats, we moved away from being that hunter-gatherer. And then we started being able to plan our food. That was the biggest issue was we went from not knowing where our next meal was going to come from to being able to plan out our survival. And everything that we've done has made it to where we can plan out our survival just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And we get separated from that. I wouldn't say the animal man, but we move away from that less sophisticated being and go
that hunter the hunter-gatherer type was more, we were acting more like the herds. We were following the herds. And now we went into being able to stay in one place. So we had an easier way of defending, ourselves and our families. We could build stationary homes. Now I just thought about this, the tractor. Did we invent the tractor in America, or is that something in Europe?
I believe it was, no, it wasn't Eli Whitley. Eli Whitley did the cotton gin. Tractors have been around for a long time. Your first tractors were steam powered. And I'm not exactly sure as to where the first ones were, but the first ones were like massive, and we're talking extremely, like one of the first steam engines for mining was here in the U.S., but it wasn't that far off of horse and buggies, and I'm pretty sure that the first tractors were out here as well. And that was a huge leap for us as well, because we went from having horse-drawn metal plows that a horse is 1 horsepower. If you had 2 horse, you have 2 horsepower. Your average tractor has back then, the steam power tractors, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 horsepower. So you're breaking dirt that you couldn't break before. You're busting, that's why they call them sod busters. You're busting sod, you're busting grass that had never been busted before. You're going through fields and breaking up rock clusters that we couldn't do with a single horse or 2 horses or 3 horses. And I mean, anybody who's ever been around somebody who actually works a horse team plowing, that is a painful process. I do not know a single person that does that does not use 4-letter words on a regular basis. And
my friend Will, now he does this, and he's actually got the old equipment, like the old horse-drawn hay cutters and rakes. I mean, he kind of collects that stuff, I guess, to a degree. But and he loves that stuff. Now I don't know if he cusses and uses 4-letter words. I've not heard him say much of them, but I'm gonna ask him that question. I said, my buddy says everybody cusses that uses this. Do you cuss while you're using horses? But
oh yeah, because you got to think horses have a mind of their own, and if you get horses that really don't like each other, one wants to go one way, one wants to go the other.
Yeah, I'm used to just dealing with one horse. And even then, you're dealing with a very stubborn animal sometimes that doesn't. If it don't like you, you're not getting a good ride. I didn't use 4-letter words, but I have got thrown, I've got bit, I've got kicked, I've got stoned. I actually have one throw a nail into my wrist here, and it didn't go. It hit this bone or tendon, whatever's hard right there. It just like miraculously hit that. I was like, thank you, Lord. I could have bled out right here chewing this stupid horse. But it slung it right into there, and I learned a lesson. You might want to go ahead and clip that nail off and rasp it. Don't put all 5 or 10 through. I learned real quick not to do that no more. Oh, yeah. But have you read the 1 second after about the grid down? Okay, everybody in pretty well prepped community,
by Fortune.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody in the prepping community usually goes to that they start in that, because that kind of gives the whole premise of the grid going down and how it would affect modern man. And when I was reading that, they were going into the whole town was mobilizing to grow every seed that was in the town, and you had you had your mechanics working on getting these old steam tractors that some of the collectors had up and rolling. And that was the thing they were talking about, how massive they were. And, what if we, the military even is concerned about this. They went before Congress. What was it, 2011 or 12? They went before Congress about this. Like, what was it, 70 members or 80 members of the military?
That wasn't even the first time that they went to Congress about that. They were going to Congress about that in case a nuclear attack happened back in the 80s. They were talking about it. And
they halted a lot back in the 80s, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, so most of your vehicles for the military are naturally EMP proof, naturally, because they are a multi-fuel, but they run off of diesel. They have a fuel water separator. They have all that on the vehicle. But the biggest issue that they had was when they went from having carburation on the vehicle to I drew a blank. The
Fuel injection.
Yeah, the fuel injection. And that was the biggest thing, was because fuel injection is controlled by a computer. It may be a basic computer, but it's a computer nonetheless. And so that was their biggest issue. Then you went through, and that's why they stuck with, after they had the multi-fuels, they went from that to the Humvees and stuff that were just straight diesel. There's no computers anywhere in that. That's where you went to your FM and your LMTVs that were diesel. And there were computers in that, but they were wrapped in an aluminum case that would block most of your EMP issues.
Faraday cage, basically.
Well, not necessarily a Faraday cage, but it was similar. Because aluminum does very well in blocking those. That's why aluminum trash cans. You get people that are using steel and aluminum trash cans and lining it with cardboard and putting their electronics in it and going, I'm good. As long as your object doesn't have contact with that aluminum surface and has a insulator in between, you're good. And so...
So you're learning here, folks, how to make a homemade Faraday cage from Jeremy Calgaro. People are going to be trying to get aluminum and steel trash cans to put around their computers in their cars now. And
honestly, if you're trying to do something like that, and you know that something is coming, like let's say we get a 30-minute warning, and you're like, I've got everything else taken care of, but I want to save my computer. So what you do is you lay out your aluminum foil. And you set it down. I keep a good stock of aluminum foil, and the duct tape, the aluminum ducting tape.
Yeah.
So I keep that. So you lay out your aluminum foil, and you either roll it up, you fold it up to where it's attached to each other, and then you tape it, and you lay it out in one big sheet. You put a cardboard box in the middle of that. You put your computer and your stuff in that. Then you fold your aluminum foil up and around that box and seal it up so that there's no breaks anywhere around it where that aluminum to where there's any gaps in it. And that, as long as it's the heavy duty aluminum foil, should do you. If you want to do 2, 3, 4 layers of it, cool. But as long as the stuff inside, there's no gaps in the aluminum, and the stuff inside is not touching that metal, it should be fine.
Now, we're talking about grid down. Now, I see 2 types of grid down. I see the electromagnetic pulse we're talking about protecting from, and that's what you deal a lot with in the 1 Second After series. But then you look at Rawls, at his novels, and that's the other grid down situation is just lack of people to run it. We're kind of getting there because you don't have nobody is in the conventional work setting now. Everybody is starting online businesses.
You'll be looking at 3 different types. You have your EMPs and coronal mass ejections. You have your lack of personnel. And then you have your malicious intent. Your malicious intent would be the guys that are hacking in and causing issues. Or like down in Georgia, they had those guys go up and they were shooting the friggin' transformers.
They're attacking the grid in that manner all around the country. There is a friend of mine, her tag's Perky Prepper, and she's on TikTok. She's going through a certain kind of class, and the guy who is doing the training was talking about it. Now, he manages that in a large urban setting in a city, I believe. And he was talking about the attacks on the grid, like just every day they were having those kind of attacks in that city. And, that lack of personnel kind of, we're looking at people attacking the grid right now. We just had the Chinese spy balloon, the big red spy balloon. Now it was white, but we had this huge spy balloon that could have carried a low yield nuke that could have, it was high orbit, It could have knocked our grid out. And then now we're looking at possibly what Rawls always predicts is an economic collapse. We have the bank runs, and nobody's money's worth anything. Everybody's stealing from the stores like we've seen in Buffalo recently. So then the stores are out. They're coming to your house. The police are not showing up to their job. Military's not reporting. They're going AWOL because they've got to protect their family, and there's nobody there to run the nuclear power center. There's nobody there to run the switch yards. There's nobody there running the steam plants and the solar power plants while people are attacking them.
Joe and Jill Sixpack don't want to run the gauntlet in their minivan just to go and provide you power.
No, yeah.
And
well,
and with
the van life has took a significant amount of people out of the workforce. I love that freedom mentality. That's great. I mean, that's the old settlers mentality. Load up in the covered wagon and let's go out into the frontier. But we've built up a system that depends upon on a large major scale. To me, I feel like we if we're going off grid, we got to start looking at solar. We got to start looking at hydroelectric and wind. We got to start looking at self-generated power in these communities. We got to start looking at 3D printing and milling because that's where we need AI. And I got a segment coming up Friday about AI. That's where we need AI in a small community setting because you may have that guy that's good at ideas and loading it into a computer, coming up with parameters, but then you got this computer that can make everything the community wants. But yeah, lack of personnel, that's going to allow AI to take over. I feel like that kind of allows all of it.
You want to know what? And here's something that'll chill you to the bone. So every year we have tornadoes and we have hurricanes. Kentucky just had the big windstorm and all this. What happens every time that we have a hurricane, a set of tornadoes, or a big windstorm, or a big ice storm? Everyone sends their linemen because there's not enough to replace it. And so we send them from all over the country. Now, what happens when all that stuff all over the country goes bad? And then all of a sudden, not only are we trying to replace all this stuff, but we're trying to replace all this stuff with stuff we don't have anything to replace it with.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the equipment to make the materials to replace it. Now, there was some rumors I heard that a lot of your utility companies were stocking up on extra materials for something like this.
Trump started it. Trump did a big thing.
Trump did.
Yeah, Trump did a big thing when he first got into office where he started pushing for all these companies to start having spares for their big transformers, for their big converters, for all their big stuff, where they were going to have at least enough to set up a spare to run important stuff while we come up with the rest of it to run everything else. Because it would really stink if we don't have any way to keep the hospitals electrified. It would really stink if we can't keep the water purification systems running, if we can't keep the sewage systems running, if we can't keep there are certain systems throughout our industrial base that if you stop those for too long, they will harden up and stop completely. Petroleum's one, aluminum's another. Friggin' any of those, copper's a big one. Any of those things where they're actually moving a molten object from one place to another. If it stops moving and it cools, you might as well just cut those pipes apart and take them and replace them.
Yeah.
And so
because when I dealt in, I worked for Quartz Global. When we went to do a clean out, we had to take the pipes out because you stopped it. They'd run it clean, but that stuff would just stop. And we used Doutherm to keep it superheated and from, where it would, move. And when they stopped the system and they shut it down, that was our job. We would go in, a lot of the floor workers on the plant would go in with maintenance to remove that that pipe and ductwork and send it off to be cleaned out, because even while it was moving, it had stuff building up. But even after that, you would have things that were blockages. So I see exactly what you're saying, because I mean, most of your refineries, most of your manufacturing settings that are dealing with metals, I mean, your dye equipment's screwed. You know, it's stuck in there.
There's a whole nother system that we would all think that we can depend on that would be screwed as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's your train system.
Yeah.
So all those train systems, all the switches and stuff that tell trains where to go here, there, and what have you, is all run off of the local electric systems. They may have battery access for a short period of time. But the thing is that if we don't have cell systems, if we don't have satellite systems feeding into those, if there's no power getting to those to charge those systems, after however many days, weeks, or months, all those battery systems, all those backup systems will run out of fuel, will run out of juice. And then how do you keep one train from going down this track and not turning where it's supposed to, and it keeps going down that track and slams into another?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what we're dealing with in East Palestine, especially if they're carrying chemicals.
So imagine two trains like that hit each other.
That'd be wild, dude. That'd be
and we have no infrastructure. And we have no infrastructure to warn the local areas to evacuate. We have no electricity to warn everyone. We have no electricity to tell people to stay out of the area. We have no powered anything to be able to go and clean it up.
You wouldn't have your local fire departments or even the industrial fire departments because, and I'm going to say this, most of your local fire departments are not as well trained and well versed in hazmat and chemical as we were, because we would have these guys coming in with scenarios for a house fire, trying to apply that for search and rescue in a factory setting. Oh, yeah. And you had the guys that had been doing it for a while that were training us. It'd be a younger guy that was coming in. He'd be a smoke diver. One of the most highly trained firemen you're going to have. Smoke divers are that's a great program. They're the elite of firefighters, but yet they're not. This guy was trying to apply house fire situations to a factory. He's like talking about reaching out from the wall with your leg. I'm like, dude. We got rooms that's bigger than most houses, that'll hold 4 or 5 houses. There ain't none of that. And so we had to start brainstorming for that. So then that goes back to chemical spills. Your average Joe that's a voluntary firefighter in most towns, they know a little bit, but they don't know enough to what if you got this chemical and that chemical? Yeah, you can grab the SDS. But can you read fast enough before that stuff's
90% of the chemical emergencies that happen with fire departments, they're calling poison control just like we do.
Man, I didn't know that statistic because I've not served in a local fire department. I've mainly done in the industrial setting, but that's a wild statistic right there. They're calling poison control.
Well, you got to think about it. Even as a firefighter, with the experience that you have, I've done some wildland firefighting, but yet I know a bit about fire and the nature of fire, but I don't know what would happen to somebody if they drank Windex. I don't know what would happen to somebody if they drank toilet bowl cleaner. I don't know what would happen to somebody if they went outside and they decided to chug a bottle of 10W30. And most
and then you get your kids eating Tide Pods.
Yeah. and most of your fire departments, those guys don't know it all. And no. So they're calling somebody with a nice computer with all of it listed down.
And you think about it though, not having access to that. We're so dependent on computer technology to the point we thought it was all going to end in Y2K. I don't know. I was just a kid, but I was 14, I think, 14 or almost 15 when that happened. And everybody was terrified. Nothing ever happened. But, we're so dependent on computer technology now since, we've come from World War II. I mean, it's literally an apocalypse it could cause because we don't have access. I mean, and thinking on this point, it would probably be good to have manuals on poison, on your different forms of poison. Now, I believe I actually have one in there in my library. I got so many books now, I'll buy stuff and forget what I got because I got piles of just hard information.
Well, not only that, everyone's so used to the internet. Ask a kid what the Dewey Decimal System is.
The what?
The Dewey Decimal System.
Well, I remember hearing about it, and
the Dewey Decimal System is how you find things in a library through index cards.
Oh yeah. The card catalog. Okay, yeah. I was sitting there thinking math for a second, and then you said that. I remember. Yeah, that is true. Most kids wouldn't know how to use a card catalog because that's all we had when we were looking for stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of adults have forgotten that.
Yeah, that blows my mind that we're sitting here. I'm supposed to be this prepper, and I've prepared in all these different ways of food production and supplies and getting myself past that mark. And then here you are breaking up Dewey Decimal System. My mind went blank on something I actually used to use all the time as a kid because that's something they would teach. And that was early 90s,
They don't teach it anymore. They teach look it up on the internet. That their whole library is getting cleared out to be used for freaking computer labs.
As a minister, I've been a minister now for 20 years, and I was taught originally to use the average minister is to build this huge resource material library. You've got commentaries, topographical Bibles, biblical dictionaries, Hebrew, Greek lexicons. I've got all that out in my garage in totes. I've got thousands of dollars worth of materials, just resource materials to look in. And it started probably about 10 years ago. I went to using Google, and I could just, I can search it. I can find whatever I need. And so those things were just sitting on the shelf, and I put them out in the garage in mothballs. I'm glad I kept them now because now I'm looking around. I'm thinking this thing could actually go down. We could see an economic collapse, an EMP, all this at once because, we're seeing bank runs. We're seeing 7 banks that were being warned here recently of an emergency. Then we're seeing banks outside the U.S. affected by the SVB collapse. They're not able to pay pay their payroll because that bank shut down. They're saying Etsy may not be able to do the payouts to the people that are using the platform because of their investment. So we're seeing all across the board these things that are coming just to take them. It just seems like to take America, not just America, but the West down. We just got passed by the BRICS nations, and the BRICS nations produce a lot of food. They process a lot of food, and they manufacture a lot of stuff, and they hold most of the rare earth minerals that we use for our technology. So this thing could go down in a moment like that. The 1 second after, Jeremy. We've talked about these worst case scenarios. We've talked about these different technologies that allow us to basically live these comfortable lives. But the basic thing is we're coming into spring. If this was to happen today, you would want to start getting food in the ground because that's going to be key, food and water. What are your suggestions on if you've not planted, how to get in, if you've never done a garden, how to get into it, small space gardening, kind of give us your thoughts to that person that's a novice.
All right. So if you're starting a garden now and the world isn't ending, the first thing I'd say is contact your area extension office because they will be able to tell you what grows best in the area for our climate and when to start, what to start. Because a lot of people think, oh, it's spring, I could put all these seeds in the ground. No, there are some seeds that don't work like that. Radish seeds, turnip seeds, freaking collard greens, lettuce, believe it or not, does not grow well in the heat. Stuff like that. There are certain seeds that grow well in the heat that you have to plant later in the season if you're direct sowing, rather than starting them in little cups. There's that.
Mm-hmm.
Your extension office is going to be one of your best bets. It's pretty much like, so every state has a college that they pay that is funded to go through and do extension services where they teach planting, gardening, and pretty much old school stuff for agriculture to people for free. And it's one of those things, and they do that as a service because back when it first started, they understood that we have to have farming in order to live.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain people that you need at all times. You need a farmer 3 times a day, a soldier 24 hours a day, and in your life. And it's one of those things that 3 times a day you better be thanking that farmer. And those extensions offices are where a lot of farmers get their start. A lot of farmers learn from FFA and 4-H and all that, but the FFA and 4-H are working through those extension offices to teach these younger kids how to do stuff. And so that would be the biggest thing. If it was a worst
in the South. In the South, you were mentioning about the certain seeds. There's things that I have to start growing in February and March. If I'm going like the greens, the radishes, the carrots, potatoes, I have to start all that in March. And then I'm harvesting earlier than other things. Tomatoes, peppers, I can wait till April. I can wait till May, even June. I can plant late crops of those. And then I can plant a second crop of potatoes and radishes and lettuce in the fall. So depending on where you're at, the heat index and what you're dealing with around, that's a good point. I've actually, I had an elder gentleman was telling me about this. Like they have booklets and everything they can give you. They have resource material they can give you, don't they?
Oh, yeah. And not only do they have booklets, they have, back to the internet, they have websites and stuff that you can go to. They have actual, most of your extension offices have actual libraries. Like I've worked with my local extension office who hadn't done it before, but they started going through and talking to the school libraries and started talking to the local libraries. So as they start getting rid of these agricultural books because they've aged out or people just aren't checking them out, they aren't just getting thrown away. So they're going to these extension offices now so that they have all that information and it doesn't just get thrown away. That's where a lot of my libraries come from, is from old libraries and stuff like that. So
they actually have the books on location in a library?
A lot of times the library will, and if the library doesn't have it, a lot of times your extension office will have books on it. If not, they'll have ebooks that you can download and be able to use that. Because you got to think, they are a college that is teaching, they are a part of a college that is teaching agriculture. So they have those textbooks as well. They have access to all the textbooks. They have access to the professors. They have access to the college students that are doing whatever funky science project that you just happen to be doing that year. Plus, they have record of all those other prior college students that were doing their funky science experiments to get whatever degree they were going to get. So you never know if one kid just may have come up with something that is write down exactly what you're doing and happens to have that information available to you.
So what you're telling me is you've actually found a logical use for a college student.
Yeah.
My Lord, you finally figured it out. We always wondering what good they were for, and now we found out they can put that stuff. And I'm joking when I say that because I know there's some good folks out there that worked hard and learned a lot in college. Then you have your hangers on that just got through, and then they put them in charge of my whole factory, and they run it in the ground. And I've seen it come. I would not say that. But now, so we're kind of coming to the end of the segment here, and, you're talking about this spring planting. What would you like to kind of finish on the finishing thoughts that you would like to add to this as we come to a close?
All right, so right now would be the best time for everybody to, everyone is still stocking up and doing all that. there are three things I want people to look at right now for this week to kind of pay attention to. Is I want them to look at if they've got a year's worth of canned goods, what they think is a year's worth of canned goods, to count how many cans those are. And think about that and the amount of jars they would need to replace that. And
that is a good, yeah.
And then also, too, not only the jars, what kind of shelving are they going to need to hold that weight? And to look at how many lids that they would need. Because they don't need the bands. You can keep reusing the bands. But the thing is how many lids would you need? And how many lids do you have over for, let's say, if it's an extended grid down situation and we can't replace those, then how many sets of those lids for that whole set of jars? And that is
a good idea.
And that's what your grandmother was working with back in the day. And that's why when I see a stack of jars on Facebook's the Facebook Marketplace or something like that, I see about getting that set of jars. If I go through, if there's a sale on them, I grab them. If they're off brand, I don't care. If I go and I get a jar, if I get a glass jar like from my salsa or my spaghetti or something like that, I wash and I disinfect the heck out of it, and it gets kept away over on a separate shelf because I can put these.
Goodwill's got a lot of jars too.
Oh yeah,
you find them in Goodwill a lot of times.
Oh yeah, so that's something seriously to think about because most people are thinking, "Oh, I'll be able to can." Well, where are you going to get those jars? If it's a grid down,
can freeze.
Yeah, if it's a grid down,
my grandparents was big on freezing, so they didn't even have enough jars, really.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things. Not only that, they didn't eat as much. They didn't eat as much because they couldn't store as much. There's only so many jars that they had. There's only so much of everything that they had. So that's one thing. Next thing I want people to think about and to start thinking about right now, as far as for this week to kind of keep an eye on stuff. Everybody that has a yard or has access to ground should be putting in fruit trees right now. Right now is the time to be planting fruit trees. Not only that, the trees that are in the ground need to be trimmed back in order to bring in fruit and to continue bearing fruit. All right, you need to start looking at fertilizing, what you need to do to take care of those trees because this is the month to do it. Last month and this month for most states. It's the very beginning of spring is when you want to do all that so that they have the last part, the majority of spring to put out roots, and then all summer to put out roots, and all fall to put out roots, and then they can rest during the wintertime. And then next year, by the time next year comes around, that tree is probably twice the size of what it was when you first put it in. So that's a big one. Number two, right now, everyone's grass is pretty much dead and it's starting to come back. Now's the time to start killing that grass off and putting in a garden. Flat out. People did not have gardens, did not have grass and big, huge lawns unless you were royalty or rich before World War II and the Great Depression. After the Great Depression and after World War II, people started getting these great jobs and all that. And in order to show that they were making really good money, they stopped growing a garden and started having grass because they wanted to have a huge lawn like the White House. And so it was one of those things, and it's the truth. And so it was one of those things that they started having these lawns. Every house is built on, if you look at the developments, as far as like housing developments and stuff like that, where you have huge subdivisions, all those houses roughly have the same size yard. And if you look at the size of those yards compared to older houses that were built, older divisions that were built, it's roughly the same size lots. That was because that was worked out to be about the right size to have a large enough garden to sustain a person while still having a job and be able to help them out with being able to feed themselves. So
that is a good point.
Yeah, so it's one of those, and that's right about a quarter of an acre. Can make a big difference, can make or break many families when it comes to growing. So you start getting rid of that grass and start putting in either raised beds or actual garden beds. Start putting in fruit trees. Start putting in stuff that's going to continue to grow food. And yeah, it may not be the popular thing in the neighborhood, but you know what? When those tomatoes come up, when all that stuff starts coming up, how much you want to bet if you offered it to some of those neighbors, they'd be all about taking it from you. They'd be all about getting it from you. And it's because there is nothing more wonderful than fresh food. No matter where it's coming from, people love fresh food. And it's because it's ingrained into our genetics that food is important. And that food is... And so it's one of those things of, that's something that people really need to think about this month. That people need to start thinking about.
Some French kale, I'll tell you that.
Week. Oh, yeah. This week and next week is about the time that people really need to start paying attention to this. And they need to start looking at their gardens and start looking at that. After that, after the gardens come in, there's a whole nother thing. We'll talk about that later, to where we'll just kind of keep people thinking about that next thing throughout the year. This is the way that people that are self-sufficient think on a constant basis.
So you're committing to another podcast.
I'll commit to another podcast.
Well, we'll get back in a couple weeks. I'm going to try to get my friend Tom on here. He's one of the top ufologists in the country right now, or he has been. He's second most searched ufologist in the country. So I'm going to try and get him on. I'm going to try and get William on. He's kind of right up there with you in my prepping council. He lives in Idaho, and he's been feeding me a lot of information that he's finding, on just what's going on under the, behind the scenes. But definitely be glad to get you back in here in a couple weeks. And I'm going to try and do this on a Wednesday. It may come out the next Wednesday. That way I can kind of keep them ready and scheduled to go one ahead of the other. And so you may not hear this till, what's the day, the 15th. So you may not hear this till next Wednesday, but we're going to get it on there, and going to try and do the live streams on Monday, where I do the Chaos Cast live stream. We're going to try and do things like this on Wednesdays, and then Friday I'm going to try to have one, just an individual one, where I just get in there myself and do a deep dive on something, and that way we kind of got a good spread of stuff for people to listen to. You've kind of been with me from the beginning on TikTok, and so you've got a lot of knowledge. You've proven that. You've always had good advice.
I plan on doing more videos on TikTok this year. I've decided to start, and I finally decided to go ahead and start putting out more. I'm not going to monetize or anything, but I'll put it out there. So if you want to share it, also too, if people want to go see it and check it out. And then I'm even thinking about doing some YouTube videos on some stuff, just for the fact of, I want to get the information out there. One of the worst things that somebody could do is to sit on knowledge and watch somebody else. It's to sit on the knowledge of how to swim and watch somebody else drown.
Yeah. So, this platform we're on right now, this Riverside, I know a lot of people use Zoom, and you can even do it with TikTok live stream, like where you can download it. But this has got your your editing suite, where you can go in and you can do your clips. You can even cut it into smaller clips for the short video platforms. So I would highly suggest, it's a free thing they have on here through Anchor, and I use Anchor to put my podcast on like most major platforms. Once you get that going, you can do your video podcast on Spotify, because I'm going to try to do a video podcast version of this and just an audio, because I've had it. It won't let me share the video out to everywhere. It just lets me share it to Spotify. So I had to do some finagling to get it on everything else video wise. But we're going to do audio on this wherever anybody's at. So you'll be able to just tell them, go listen to the Chaos Cast. I'm going to be on there in a week or so. But yeah, dude, definitely look at that. We're going to go ahead and end. And I'm I'll stop the recording, but we can talk afterwards. But,
all right, no problem.
Yeah, thank y'all for joining the Chaos Cast. This is my friend Jeremy Calgaro. He is a fellow prepper. He's a level A prepper. That's where he comes from. I'm just level C. You know, I'm trying to get there. But, yeah, he is a former Army SERE instructor, survival instructor, and just general prepper, trying to keep his own self alive. We thank y'all for coming in. Jeremy, we thank you for bringing that knowledge in. Can you tell everybody where they can reach you at?
Best bet would be Jeremy Jeremy C Survival on TikTok,
Okay.
and that would be their best place to find me. And I haven't started up the YouTube yet. I have a YouTube account, but I've only watched stuff on it. The sad part is that's where I get most of my news now. It's a little more honest.
Yeah.
But
YouTube.
But I'll let y'all know when I get the video started up on there, and then maybe starting up a Facebook for the farm to where I can start putting stuff out on that as well. And then
that sounds like some good plans, because we need more. You know, I'm seeing more and more of this happen, especially with what you call the millennial generation, the 1980 to 2000 age group. They call us the back to farming generation. They were real worried about us there for a while, and now, hey, we're starting up farms. You thought we wasn't going to do nothing, but we came back. It wasn't just the Looney Tunes and Rugrats from Nickelodeon. We're finally making a difference. But and I thank you for your information you share. We're going to go ahead and end it, folks. Y'all come back now. You hear?